How can I balance robust routines and plans with enjoying the present moment? Is it possible to be an ambitious high achiever without a baseline level of anxiety?
It's an interesting question because coincidentally, I listened to two different podcasts in the last few days that I think of as giving two different perspectives on this question. Both podcasts by people I know and respect. So let's start with these two perspectives I heard coincidentally just in the last few days. So the first was from Oliver Burkeman, who wrote 4,000 Weeks, friend of the show. He blurbed Slow Productivity. I blurbed 4,000 Weeks. And he really has made a name for himself with this sort of much more like British sort of relaxed appraisal of time management and productivity. I was listening to Oliver recently on Chris Williamson's podcast, Modern Wisdom. And Berkman was sort of giving this kind of ideal, he's like, here's his approach to personal productivity, how he thinks about these things right now. And I'm paraphrasing, but his system was like, have a few things you want to get done, but also be willing to let your interest guide you. If you don't really have energy for this thing you want to do, but there's something else you're kind of excited about, maybe work on that instead. You'll be okay. That's a paraphrase, but that's sort of a classic 4,000 Weeks approach. Let's call that call this humanistic personal productivity. It's sort of, what are we, as humans, what really kind of fits the way we operate best. All right, then soon after this, sort of coincidentally, I was listening to Scott Galloway, who, we talked about earlier in the show. I was just on his Prof G podcast, and then I was listening to a bunch of Galloway. And I was listening to him on Dan Senor's podcast, Call Me Back. And they were talking about, at the end, Galloway's new book, the algebra of wealth, right? And he was sort of giving his take on life and advice. And Galloway had this take, which is look, in your 20s in particular, your biggest resource is your time. What you want to be doing with this is really getting good at something valuable. Because he's like, here's the end game. He's like, look, this is a reality that's not good, but it's a reality, especially in America. We are not kind to poor people. And if you can build up a skill, whether it's knowledge work or in trades, you can use this as a foundation of financial security, and that's what you want. You want to be able to, when you're upper middle age, to be able to take care of your kids, to be able to help your parents when they get older and sick, to not have to worry about, to go pursue things you're interested in, to not be worried about money. He's like, that's the game. And it's hard. And you need to take all this free time you have in your 20s and you need to focus on, I am going to get good. So we'll call that sort of pragmatic personal productivity. And there's some tension between these two, right? Oliver's just have a few things to do. And also it's okay if you don't do those, if your interests take you somewhere else. And Galloway is basically look, if you don't sort of get after it and work really hard to master some good stuff, your life's going to be miserable. So we kind of have these two different approaches, humanistic and pragmatic. So I think what's going on here is that Berkman's approach, I think, matches the human brain. This is ideally how humans are wired. This is really what productivity is to humans. Is this much looser sort of, what am I going to do right now? Well, I need to go hunt this thing, or we're going to go forage. You're sort of doing one or two things. You don't have complicated plans, and that those plans are also contingent. Well, I don't know, it's kind of raining, so I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do this. Or there's a new urgent thing that came up. Let me work on that before. I do think you would be happier with the Berkman personal productivity. On the other hand, I think Galloway is right that it is really hard to be financially secure, and you do have to build up skills, and it's hard, and especially when you have a lot of free times in your 20s, you probably have to do some grinding, right? I mean, because it's hard. It's hard to, in a modern economy, it's hard to convince other people to give you money. But you really want people to give you money because without money, things are hard. And so we have to construct a sort of artificial relationship with time just for a sort of financial survival, for a sort of basic economic security. So I don't know, maybe our goal is you want to get to a place in life where you can have a Berkman-style personal productivity, and that's going to require a Galloway-style pragmatic personal productivity along the way. Maybe Berkman's giving us the goal, and Galloway is giving us the path you have to take to be able to get to something like that goal. But I think back to the original question, the Galloway-style pragmatic personal productivity it doesn't have to be super anxiety provoking, but it's hard. And you have to care about, what am I doing? Am I making progress on what matters? You have to sort of fight back distractions. You have to make time for what's important. There's a sort of defensive time management in here. I can't let all these distractions encroach so much that nothing gets done. There's a sort of urgency of, I have to keep working deeply on the things that matter. This is my time to start to get good. And some of that's stressful and some of that's sort of anxiety producing. One thing I want to suggest, not to bring this back to me, but that my new book, Slow Productivity, maybe gives us like a reasonable roadmap for walking this tightrope, right? For like, okay, we need to do something like Galloway style personal productivity just to survive, but we're attracted to the Berkman style personal productivity. Slow productivity sort of helps you split the difference. It says we got to do the work, we got to get better. But let's make sure along the way that we're not doing too many things at the same time. That gets counterproductive and it's particularly stressful. Let's make sure along the way that we're giving ourselves a reasonable amount of time. We can't procrastinate forever, but let's not try to squeeze everything into the smallest time frames. Let's work consistently on getting better, but we can have variations in intensity and we don't have to have super unrealistic time frames. Slow productivity says, okay, if we really care about quality in a very specific way, what's the craft that matters? And let me actually work specifically on training that craft like I would train to get better at an instrument. We're going to get to that Galloway goal of security much easier. We'll get there much faster. We're going to gain much more control over our schedule, much more autonomy quicker if we're not just working really hard, but working hard at the specific goal of getting better at something that matters. Slow productivity, we can think of, in other words, as a way to navigate Galloway style his pragmatic personal productivity in a way that minimizes the exhaustion and burnout. There's still probably going to be some anxiety there. It's hard to do hard things and the pressure is on. But slow productivity gives us a way to navigate that, where not only are we more likely to be successful with getting to the Berkman promised land, but we are going to get there without it having to be an impossible or unsustainable slog. I don't believe that we have to grind it out in a miserable sort of way to get to a sort of security later in our professional career. I do think we have to be careful about our time. I do think we're going to have to prioritize like the deep efforts to get better. I do think we have to have defensive time management to make sure that other things don't come in and take over and prevent us from making progress. And I do think all that's kind of hard, but it doesn't have to be miserable. So I'm going to throw slow productivity in here as the way to follow the Galloway path as nicely and sustainably as possible en route to getting to the Berkman promised land. Both good interviews, actually.
Yeah, I'll check them out.
I did Modern Wisdom as well. If you're looking for another podcast interview with me, I did Chris's show. I recorded it down in Austin, but that came out kind of recently. So check that out as well. My interview on Modern Wisdom. All right, who do we have next?
Next question is from Adita. I currently work in a startup with long hours. I struggle to find time to sharpen my problem solving and programming skills. How do I plan weekly and daily sessions such that I can follow my interests pragmatically without hampering my performance at the company?
So my best advice here is combine the two objectives. So you're in a startup, a big hour startup. You're going to exhaust yourself if you're trying to have a sort of non-trivial, deep work requiring skill building sessions outside of all the hard work you're already doing for your startup. Again, going back to the Galloway vision, maybe if you're in your 20s, you kind of have the energy to do this, but I don't know. I'd rather spend the time you do have doing other things that are rewarding, servicing the other buckets of the deep life. So I think the right thing to do here is start to find ways that you can take on professional challenges that are useful for the startup in your career, that require, in order for you to succeed with them, for your skills in strategic ways to get better. This is almost always the optimal way to do this. When you're trying to develop a professional skill, if you can integrate that into your existing professional life, that's almost always going to be better, as opposed to I'm studying to do this on my own, and then over here I have my job. And there's two reasons why it's better typically to integrate them. One is it's just more manageable. You're not requiring extra time. It's what you're already doing for your job. Your work to get better at this is directly helping something you're supposed to be doing. Getting better at the skill will give you immediate rewards. There's a course, an online course I do with Scott Young called Top Performer about getting better in your career. And this is one of the key ideas in the course is we have you design a professional activity that is straight up useful for you and your boss and your job. but also is going to make you get better at something that's useful to your job. So you combine it, it's much more manageable. You're not having to find extra time. And two, it's much more effective, right? There's a general rule of learning new skills. That is like the more close you can get your practice to the actual application of the skill you're learning, the better. I had this conversation on a podcast the other day where they were saying, hey, should I meditate to improve my ability to focus on hard work problems? And I said, well, if you want to improve your ability to focus on hard work problems, practice focusing on hard work problems. We don't do something similar and hope that some of these skills transfer over, because this transference can often be low fidelity and not that useful. Practice the thing you want to get better at. So like if you want to learn how to like program or whatever, program specific things that are useful for your company. Don't take abstract programming classes, right? So you want to try to connect what you're doing, the training, to the actual application. So that's my advice there, is make what you're doing an implicit training session. And I think that'll solve a lot of your problems and give you the goal of, as you build these new skills, giving you more leverage and control. It's what we always talk about. You get more control and leverage over your working life, and you can really take that out for a spin.
For those interested in the course, it's through your newsletter and it opens twice a year, right?
Yeah, I announce it in my newsletters twice a year. Scott actually has a new book coming out in May, all about how to learn things, like how to learn hard things. And I'm setting up for him to come on the show. One of the ideas I have is to have Scott be a sort of like a guest question answerer with me. We could do a bunch of questions about learning skills, and him and I can try to answer them together. So I'm having Scott. I've known Scott forever. I do 2 courses with him. This new book is awesome. So anyways, we'll get more on that with Scott soon on the podcast. All right, who we got next?
Next question is from Lily. I have lived under a controlling family environment for most of my life where I wasn't allowed to have any hobbies or many friends. I'm now living on my own and I'm struggling to create my own routine. I want to live a deeper life, but I feel that it's empty. How can I begin to build a deeper life after years of neglect?
Well, Lily, it's a great question, and I love your thinking about this. I love the self-awareness of, this might be hard for me, but it's important. And I think before we get to the details, the reason why that self-awareness is important is because when and if it's hard, and it will be hard, because again, you were not used to the sort of more expansive vision of the deep life growing up. When you struggle at first with it, you'll know this struggle is expected and you'll persist. Like, you'll know this is going to be hard. You're more likely to persist in pursuing depth, as opposed to when the first obstacle's coming up, just saying, maybe I'm not worthy of this, or maybe this is just not something that's going to work for me. So I love the self-awareness. I'm going to give a preamble to my advice here. My general preamble to this advice is probably the biggest danger throughout this process of finding more depth. The biggest danger everyone should be wary of is your phone. Because what you're trying to do here in building a more expansive depth into your life is you're going to try to be servicing more of these areas that make life meaningful and important. The contemplation, craft, community, celebration, constitution. There's going to be these broad areas, these elements that make the human life interesting and important. The phone can offer you a sort of high sugar, low quality simulacrum of satisfaction for a lot of these areas, right? Like, oh, you really like desire community. You don't have a lot of experience having friends. We can just kind of simulate having friends on the phone. Like, there's people in social media and they're commenting and they're clicking on things, and like, that's close enough and it's easy. You want to seek out, beauty and interesting things. You want to like get engaged in like the world of like what humanity can create. The phone's like, we got interesting stuff on here. Just like scroll this thing and like it'll look interesting, and binge on these shows. Like what you're looking for, the phone can give you a cheap version of. You want to be you have a call to a moral intuition. I want to be involved. I have a moral intuition. The phone's like, we can just like punch outrage buttons. Just like, look at these tweets. So the phone is going to subvert every human instinct you have as you try to build a more expansive depth. So now is the time you need to be super wary of the phone, right? Be very careful what's on there. Be very careful what services you're doing. You might consider temporarily taking social media off your phone. You should consider using something like the phone foyer method when you're at home. You have it plugged in in a set place in your house and that's where it stays, or in your apartment and you can go there to reference it, but it doesn't stick with you as a constant companion. Do things on a regular basis without your phone just so you become comfortable being alone with your own thoughts. You have a lot of actual introspection you're going to have to do here, Lily. A lot of sort of building out your schema and your understanding of the world and how you fit into it. This is going to be a lot of just you with your own thoughts. So I'm talking about once or twice a week, long walks without your phones, errands without your phone. You have to be very wary of this thing in this very important but vulnerable moment you find yourself in. All right. With that in mind, how do we make progress here? Let's go back to the deep dive from earlier in the episode. Work on your hardware first before you get too caught up in the software. Right? You've had a very limited, powerful, but very limited type of hardware you've been running on because of what it was like growing up. You now want to build out this more expansive hardware. Let's focus on the boring hardware before we get into the sexy software. So this means you want to get some control over your obligations and time, like we talked about. Here's what I'm working on. Here's my planning. I know what I'm doing, and I have control over what I do and when I do it. Work on your discipline instruction set. I have daily disciplines in these areas of my life, including areas that I've never given any attention to before, but now I am because I want to tell myself I can do things that are non-urgent but are important in the long term. Simplify stuff that's clogging things up, get automation on the stuff. I don't think that's your big problem, that piece, because you're just getting started out. But get that hardware going. Trust yourself. I have discipline. I can do things in different areas in my life. I have control over my obligations. I have a pretty reasonable control over my schedule. Now you can start working on your software. And here what I'm going to suggest is take one processing unit at a time, by which I mean one area of your life at a time, and give it a few months to do an overhaul on it. Right. All right. Let's start with maybe not community. Maybe we'll start with something like contemplation. Okay. I want to overhaul that part of my life, like a regular reading habit, meditation habit, rediscovering a sort of religious connection and integrating that into my life. Let me spend a few months just working on that. Okay. Now I'm sort of feeling like there's meaning in life and I can direct myself towards things that are important. All right. Now I'm going to focus on community for a few months. How do I start getting a service to my community, the friends I do have? How do I improve those relationships or meet new people? And you slowly go area by area and kind of build up beta versions of very basic software in each of these areas. And then after a year, go back and let's do version 1. Now you're going to iterate on this and make it better. And you can start building up really cool software. So beware of your phone, upgrade your hardware so it's ready to handle this full expanse of the human experience, and then start working on your software in one area of your life at a time. The stakes are low here at first. That's why I said beta software. I just want some sort of cool program after about a year of work running each of the areas of my life. And now I'm ready to try to come up with the new version. And this is going to take time. But I'm absolutely convinced that you will get there because you care about it, you know it'll be hard, and you're committed to actually making change. Hey, if you like this video, I think you'll really like this one as well. Check it out.